Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. The positional preview shows conclude tonight with the 2023 wide receiver class, taking a very early look at the top wide receivers in college football as the college football season is kicking off. Week 0, week 1, whatever you want to call it. And then obviously Labor Day weekend is when things really get kicking off with a lot of major matchups. Here to break it down tonight with me is Mr. Jeff Abercrombie. Jeff, welcome back. We've been doing the positional preview shows. You joined me for the running back one. Quarterbacks and tight ends were next. Really excited to have you back here for the wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say thank you for giving me a pass on some of the hardest positions to scout. I'm no self-proclaimed receiver expert as well. I definitely have dug in on running backs a lot more through my time, but I've got a few notes of color to add and some nice all 22 notes, which were great to kind of see as far as like releases go. So excited to actually really hear what you've got to say and hopefully see where we differ or see where we're the same and just kind of get a heat check on where these guys are for the start of kickoff of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And the wide receiver position every single year there continues to be a surplus of really talented players. We're seeing guys right now, rookies in training camp and preseason who are lighting it up. Really excited to see those rookies. And every year it seems like the wide receiver position continues to be deep and deep. And I think that 2023 class will be no different. So let's kind of jump right in. If you've been watching these positional preview shows on our YouTube stream over at the Saturday to Sunday YouTube channel, you have noticed that we have been screen sharing the scouting profiles from the 2023 scouting notebook that will be released next week. So there'll be a lot of information coming out on that about how to purchase that. But this gives you a little snapshot of what our initial scouting report looks like. Obviously, things will change dramatically during the season, after the season, months leading up to the pre-draft process, leading up to that 2023 NFL draft. But this is a way, if you're someone who's watching on the YouTube stream, you get an opportunity to see some of those scouting notes as well as we're talking about the player. So let me kind of cue that up here to get that showing in the background here with Jeff and I. And you will be able to see, as we're talking about certain players, you will be able to see the scouting report from the scouting notebook, yet to be released, but very soon to be released. So let's get started tonight with Jordan Addison, now playing for USC, formerly of Pittsburgh. He's a junior. He's 6 feet tall. He's 180 pounds. This is a guy that, he's undersized a little bit, especially in terms of that frame, but he's got good athleticism and long speed, very good to great acceleration, burst, explosiveness, short area and separation quickness. The footwork is really good. The route running, the ability to get open in and out of his breaks. He shows yak ability, elusiveness, and the capabilities to win at all 3 levels of the football field. I think he's got good ball skills. He shows body control. He shows the ability to adjust. To me, he's instantaneously a starting receiver in 3 wide sets. He could be a dynamic punt returner. I think he's probably best as a vertical slot receiver, but I do think you can make him the outside Z motion wide receiver. I look at him right now. I think he's a round 1, round 2 guy right now with the capabilities in that USC offense to really even explode more than the 100 receptions, 1,600 yards, 17 touchdowns he had last year. I think we could even see bigger moments from him, maybe not a statistical output, but I'm really excited about Jordan Addison and what he's going to do there for the Trojans this year. Jeff, and any other things that you saw when you watched him or any concerns you want to bring up before I maybe mention 1 or 2 things, that I'd like to see him improve upon or develop this year?
Sure. And I might lead us into things to improve. So, I mean, first impression with Addison is, came in with high expectations. He's a great player. He, made Kenny Pickett look great, at least for a certain extent. He's got the tools there, right? You can see it, you can see it in flashes where he's got really, he sinks his hips right into the break, sudden stops, really sharp movements. But I do think to reach his ceiling, I think we need to see that really develop to a more refined level, right? So whether that's, some footwork and pacing and storytelling in his roots, or the other thing I noticed was, hand positioning at the catch point, so to be able to catch away from his frame and not into his body. So those are just like two areas that, I think if he developed a little bit further, we could be talking about, I know he might already be in some people's top three, but for me, I think he'd need to refine those a little bit more to kind of hit that top tier of wide receivers we have for this class.
Yeah, I think you bring up some things that we want to see improve upon him. Listen, he's not going to be able to do too much about his frame. His frame is what it is. I think he can maybe add on a little bit of muscle, show a little bit more play strength. He's not going to be a guy that wins contested catches, or he's not going to be a guy, that's a physical type receiver. I think he's got some focus, concentration drops. He's got to clean up a little bit, and what I'm interested to see this year is last year he mostly lined up in the slot, right? He didn't have to face much press. Do we see a little bit more variety from where he's lined up this year? Do we see him against press a little bit more? Or is he going to be a guy who's strictly like a vertical slot receiver at the next level? Or does he have the capability to be that inside outside, right? Everyone thought Elijah Moore was going to be just a slot guy, and he quickly answered the bell in the NFL and showed that he could play on the outside last year, even at his smallish size and frame. I think that'll be a question that kind of, is out there with Addison and maybe a couple other guys we're going to talk about tonight too, as we get into. So it's going to be kind of interesting to kind of see, how Jordan Addison is utilized in USC. I don't think the statistics can get much better, but I do think there's things that he can do in USC that could elevate his stock a little bit. And I'm kind of excited to see where that lands. So let's keep this moving, go right on to the second player. And that is Kayshon Boutee out of LSU, the junior, 6 feet tall, 205 pounds. He's been the guy that's been Debbie Darling for years already. It feels like, average size and frame, but very good to great athleticism, speed, acceleration, explosiveness, and burst. He can win vertically. He's got very good to great body control, ball skills. He shows the ability to adjust and high point the football well. He's got great yak ability. I see footwork after the catch, movement skills, and he does the play strength and physicality to also win in that variety as well. To me, he's a guy that last year, I know he only had 38 receptions, 509 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Some of it was missed time. I think he's going to explode this year. I think he's going to profile as, he's not as refined as Ja'Marr Chase, but if he has a monster year, I think you could see him rise to be in that top 10, top 15, top 20 mix, and he's got the similar size frame as a guy like Ja'Marr Chase, just not the refinement of Chase when he was coming out. But I do think he offers a lot of similar traits in terms of his high-end skills, but there's still a lot more development and growth that needs to be done. I think right now he's probably a lock round one guy. I think he's in the mix to be the first wide receiver taken. Interested to kind of see how this year plays out for him and where he kind of falls with guys like Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, and a couple other guys obviously we'll talk about tonight in terms of, where people look at him and value him when we get to the 2023 NFL draft. Jeff, thoughts on him, what you've seen already, areas that maybe you want to see him improve upon? Do you think, the ceiling is maybe the highest for a guy like him? And if so, do you think there's a considerable amount of development that still needs to be done, similar to when we had the conversation about Bijan Robinson, on the running back show? Jeff, you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think there's as much, development that I'd need to see in the realm of what I talked about for Bijan or just what I talked about for Addison. There are a couple things where I don't see as high of a ceiling as, say, Ja'Marr Chase, which you mentioned. But I do think what he's shown on the field currently in college bodes well to be able to bring something immediately to an NFL roster. So being a tough after the catch runner who can, run good routes, make quick turns out of his break, and get off press with footwork and hand fighting, I think it's already going to play, at least in the short to intermediate range of the field. Where I didn't see him win a lot is isolated on a cornerback one-on-one on the 9 route. And, I'll be really interested to see what his actual, time speed is. But from a play speed perspective, he wasn't able to really pull away from these DBs, one-on-one or winning leverage. And you don't even always have to be a burner to win, to win on those routes. But you do have to be maybe a little bit craftier to be able to win leverage and position and stack them if you're not going to be able to run right by them. So that was the one area of his game that, I think would keep him from that true top 5, top 10 ceiling that, we've seen with some of these other prospects in the last few years.
Yeah. And I think that might be the case with the wide receivers. A couple of guys we're going to talk about tonight, I'm not sure they're top 10. I think they could be, maybe get pushed up there, but I think this is going to be a really strong class, in regards to the quarterbacks. So I could see next year, maybe we don't have a top 8 or top 9 receiver, but maybe we have a couple that go off it, in the teens. And I think Boutee is a guy who could be in that mix, right near the top of it. I'd like to see him clean up a few things. I think you make a good point. Like his time speed, I think is fast, but at times maybe he didn't translate it. I think he'll test out really well, but I think this year I'd like to see a few more instances where, the play speed matches what I think he'll be in terms of like a testing environment, in terms of what I think his athletic profile will be. So it'd be interesting to kind of follow that closely in this upcoming college football season. Let's keep this going. Next up is Gary Bryant Jr. out of USC. He's a junior. He's 5'11", 180 pounds. Another undersized guy, similar, to we were talking about, Jordan Addison before, but very good athleticism, speed, acceleration, burst, and explosiveness. He can win vertically. He shows very good footwork, yak ability, agility, and elusiveness in the open field. He's got good body control and ball skills with the ability to adjust. He shows good separation quickness with above average route running ability. To me, he's a complementary to starting wide receiver, more in 3 wide sets. I think he's a vertical slot. He could play some outside Z, especially as being the receiver in motion. But to me, he's not nearly as refined yet as a guy like Jordan Addison. Now he's going to be playing with Jordan Addison. It'll be interesting to kind of see, how they're aligned, because I think that's where we're going to get some answers this year in terms of Bryant and Addison both can't be in the slot, right? Unless they're going consistently 4 wide and they're both inside. Some of these guys are going to have to play outside, and they've mostly been limited to the slot so far in their careers. And the size, the frame, the play strength, the physicality, dealing with press, all of those things are question marks for Bryant, similar to Addison. And we're going to get some answers this year, because these guys are either both going to play on the outside, or one's going to have to play on the outside a lot more than they have in the past. And I think that's going to help us, get a little bit of clarity on maybe who could handle outside as well as inside duties. Jeff, any questions or follow-ups? I know Bryant's not a guy you've had a chance to dig too deep into yet.
No, not really on his own cut up game film. I just one other thought though, there is Mario Williams there too. So, when we include him into this list, I mean, that's obviously 3, we're putting, Bryant and Addison on this list. Mario Williams coming in the next year puts a pretty formidable weapons around, Caleb Williams, but, whether it's a metrics crowd looking for dominator or breakout, it'll be really interesting to see if Bryant's able to stand out enough to declare, or whether he'd, go for another year or not.
Yeah, this class, like Bryant's a guy that if Addison doesn't end up there, you might have seen a real breakout statistical type year from him. And now it's more like, okay, is Addison going to be the guy this year? And then next year, maybe if Addison's gone, it's Williams and Bryant stepping up to emerge maybe to the person with the largest target share. And then maybe he might be a guy that we're talking about a year from now as a guy who is a senior on this list, who is intriguing with then his teammate Mario Williams will be draft eligible. But the addition of Addison, I think, makes the questions around Bryant, his production this year, his role this year, and whether or not he ends up declaring down the line, I think legitimate questions that we'll have to follow closely here over this college football season. But yeah, as you talked about, USC offense absolutely loaded. USC is going to make noise this year throughout the season. Their offensive capabilities is going to be up there with any team in the country. Let's keep this going and go to Jermaine Burton, now of Alabama, formerly of Georgia. He's a junior. He's 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. Last year, he hit about 500 yards and 5 touchdowns for Georgia, but only 26 receptions. So he's got a very limited sample size in terms of opportunity. And that's one of the biggest concerns, limited production. But what we've seen from him has been impressive. He only has average size and frame, but very good to great athleticism, speed, burst, acceleration, and explosiveness to get down the field, win vertically. He's got more size than a couple of the guys we've talked about tonight. He's got above average to good separation quickness, footwork, and route running, very good body control, ball skills, and hands with the ability to high point. Again, sample size is small, but he's shown the ability to win at all 3 levels. He's shown the ability to high point the football, good body control and ball skills. I think he's a guy that this year could really catapult his draft stock into the round 1 mix. I think he could be the go-to guy there for this Alabama offense, and he's going to get all the opportunity that he's ever wanted after being in that Georgia offense that really kind of limited his target share and opportunity just because of the offensive scheme they run and the power run game that they have. With Bryce Young, behind center at the quarterback position and the prolific Alabama offense, Burton's going to get an opportunity this year to really explode. Lots of areas that he's got to work on, expand his route tree, show the ability to beat press consistently. So there's things about his game I'd like to see a little bit better in terms of yak ability. I think it's about average. You don't see a lot of agility and make you miss in the open field too much, more just straight line speed. But I think he could rise to the occasion this year. Jeff, thoughts on Burton? I know not a lot of film, right? 26 catches. So a lot of this is projecting off of what the limited we've seen of him.
Yeah, and you have to kind of dig deep to find good cut-ups, but and again, not always the best angles, but what I did get to see, I was very impressed with. Like I expect big things this year. You mentioned it with the athleticism, but it's the way that it translates to me and the way that he's able to use it as a weapon and a tool in the skills aspect of his game. So again, very good play speed, but he uses that to attack the position and of the DB and break them down on their spot, and then has very quick sudden breaks to just then teleport out into open space and get some separation and winning those routes. So I think from a route running perspective, from a quickness and athleticism perspective, and again the way that he's understanding how to use that, as an advantage to attack DBs rather than just try to, win over them, get around them. I think shows a pretty advanced understanding of how to play the receiver position. So I do think there's big things in store for him. Maybe one nitpicking area of improvement is, I think, the physicality. Again, pretty hard to say whether that's going to show up or not, but really the biggest thing that we'd be looking for is a true breakout.
Yeah, and listen, a couple of years ago, Matt and I constantly talked about, like, how did Georgia let Justin Fields get out of that building, right, and out of that team? I think Burton's going to be another one of those guys, not maybe at the level of Justin Fields, who I think could have brought Georgia a national title a couple of years ago if they would have, been more willing to move on from Jake Fromm and stuff, but Burton is another guy. Like, you let him leave and head to Alabama. Like, I understand Georgia's had a ton of success, won the national title last year, like right up there again. But like, Burton's another one of those guys, like, you had him in your building and now he's up against your now he's with your arch enemy. Like, it's going to be interesting to follow this because, I can't wait to watch that matchup, that individual matchup, when Georgia plays Alabama, to see Burton versus former team. It's going to be fun to watch him go against them. Let's keep this going and go up to next to Dontay Demus Jr. out of Maryland. He's a redshirt senior. He's 6'3", 213 pounds. He suffered a serious knee injury last year, so he only played 5 games, but really productive 5 games, over 500 yards, 3 touchdowns. This is a guy who's got very good size and frame. I would say he's probably got above average athleticism and speed. He's not a burner. Good footwork and burst to create separation vertically, especially late separation, which I think is so important, for guys that don't have that blazing speed. Good play strength and physicality. I like the body control, ball skills. He shows good catch radius with the ability to high point to win contested catches. Some inconsistent production at his time in Maryland. I think that's the Maryland offense. He could expand his route tree a little bit. And obviously, coming back from that serious knee injury. And also, for me, I'd like to see him handle press coverage and physicality in press coverage a little bit better. But I think his ceiling is pretty high if he could show he's over that injury. Because, like I talked about, that late separation is what I really like about Demus's game. He's not a burner, but he finds a way to get open vertically down the field. I'm intrigued with him as a guy who could be an outside X or Z receiver that can get vertical. I think he's got complementary to starting outside receiver upside to be a top 3 on the depth chart. I think there's a big year for him. They really showed that injury is behind him. And then obviously the pre-draft process, the medicals, all that stuff is going to be important for him coming off, an injury that forced him to kind of go back to college for one more year.
Yeah. And maybe just a quick thought here too, just to kind of, add in, my color. I think you summed it up really well. You talked about his body control and ability to high point, something that really jumped out to me, his ability to attack the ball in the air. And I do think his route running ability is going to allow him to potentially even be maybe the better wide receiver on his own team, which, there's talent there. And we see that sometimes, right? Sometimes we see, in their final year, someone take maybe a step over their peers, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave kind of, come to mind. So I do think you're right, as far as what he'd like to address and with the injury, and being fully healthy. But if that's the case, I do think he still has to overcome some of the offensive concerns as well, from behind center and the overall offensive scheme. But I think there's going to be enough there that he could put on good film.
Yeah, right now I know he's the talk of the NFL and he's a hot dynasty item, but I think there are some similarities to Gabriel Davis when Gabriel Davis was coming out of UCF. It's been a couple years, but he wasn't a burner, but he could win vertically down the field. There are some things about Demus's game, especially if he hits and he shows he's back from injury. I think he's in that round 3, round 4 mix right now. If he has a good year and the injury is not an issue, and that's kind of that same range that Gabriel Davis was going. Davis didn't play. There were some quarterback issues at times there too. So it'll be interesting to kind of see where Demus goes. There's a lot of talent at the wide receiver position, though, for Maryland. So that's another one similar to what we were talking about with USC. They have 3 guys that are really of intrigue. We'll talk about another one a little bit later tonight. But they're deep there and very talented and skilled at that receiver core. So it will be interesting to kind of see how that settles itself out. Let's keep this going with another one of the big names in this wide receiver class, and that is Josh Downs out of UNC. He's a junior. He's 5'10". He's 175 pounds. Similar to Jordan Addison earlier, over 100 catches last year, over 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. Another guy very undersized, but very good to great athleticism, speed, burst, acceleration, explosiveness. He can get vertical as well. Very good to great suddenness, footwork, separation quickness, movement skills, yak ability, agility, and elusiveness. He's a good route runner. He shows good ball skills and body controls. I think he's a guy that can be used as a starting vertical slot receiver. He reminds me of Tyler Lockett, dynamic punt returner. You could use on manufactured touches. The same things we've talked about a couple of guys tonight, right? The play strength, physicality, those are all concerns, showing that he can not just be limited to the slot, even though I think that's probably going to be where he's asked to play at the next level. There's just a lot I like about Josh Downs. I actually even have him slightly ahead of Jordan Addison. I'm not sure that's going to be the consensus going into this college football year. Might not be for you either, Jeff. So I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts on Josh Downs. Add anything else you like about his game, any other things that you're concerned about, and just your overall thoughts on him.
Well, I mean, I think from a refined skills perspective, I do like him over Jordan Addison right now. I think from a ceiling perspective and where they might become as prospects and draft eligible players, I would probably project that Addison will go first. I think that, the size and frame is one of those things where um, it is a detriment to him. He still plays tough. He still plays physical. He's willing to fight guys, but his small frame means he does get pushed off his desired path at times. But you mentioned that athleticism. He's a sudden, sharp mover. He uses pacing really well as well. I would say like there was one little knock on when I was watching through his film that during the catch point he'd often leave his feet, so he'd kind of like jump as he tracked and caught the ball. That kind of limits your ability to control your at the catch and post catch situation. Sometimes that comes up whether might get hit by a DB and not be able to secure the football, or limits your yak ability. Those are little things that I think can be pretty cleaned up pretty well. But again, he's a pretty dynamic mover. It's really just the size and frame concerns for me.
Yeah, and 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, guys like Downs, guys like Addison, they wouldn't be in the round one mix. Most likely they wouldn't be. It's just right now, I feel like Devonta Smith, Henry Rugg, like there's just now the door is the opportunity for players of Addison and Downs' size is just so different compared to where it was. I mean, a guy we've talked about at length this year, right? Wendell Robinson, picked in like the mid 40s. Like the year before, Kadarius Toney picked in the first round, Elijah Moore, early second round. Like the profile of wide receivers has so dramatically changed in terms of now there's all shapes and sizes, and it's not a prerequisite to have good draft capital if you're 180 pounds or 185 pounds or 175 pounds or Devonta Smith. Remember, like it was like a big thing. Could he get to 170, right? Or whatever it was at the combine, or 180, so the door is now open for guys, that don't fit that old school profile. And I think it opens the door for guys like Downs and Addison to go a lot higher now than they would have in the past, for sure. Expecting another monster year from Downs. Obviously, no Sam Howell there this year, so some transition in terms of the quarterback position there at UNC, but expect Downs to be a big part there and put up another monster season. Let's keep this going and talk about Zay Flowers, a guy who I think many people thought was going to come out last year in the NFL draft. He heads back to Boston College for his senior year. He's 5'9", 170 pounds. To me, he's a complementary to starting slot receiver, top 3-4 on a depth chart, little undersized. I think he's got good athleticism and speed, good to very good footwork, especially in his breaks in and out of his routes, good movement skills and separation quickness, good agility and change of direction skills and yak ability in the open field, good body control. I thought I was going to like his film a little bit more, though. I will say I did have some concerns about his game, and I didn't think last year when I watched him, I thought his athleticism was more like higher end. And I thought this year, I just thought it was like good. And I think that could have been the reason why maybe he didn't come out last year, because maybe he just didn't have, maybe he just wanted to go back for, finish out his degree. But I feel like he might have went back because the, draft advisory board said, listen, you're probably a day pre guy. And that's why he went back. I do have way more concerns about Zay Flowers than like Addison or Downs, who I think do have electric athleticism and explosiveness and suddenness. I think Flowers is a good slot receiver. I think that's kind of, where I kind of profile him. He can get vertically at times. I just don't think that's going to be his calling card. I think it'd be more of just like being a good, reliable slot receiver. Jeff, did you see Flowers a little bit differently? I liked this film more last summer than I did this year, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of interesting. I did see it a little differently, and the game film that I watched was from 2020. So I don't know that I saw quite the same level of skill at his release, just at what was sharp during his route running. It didn't seem, that's where I just thought there's tools, but refinement could be needed to really kind of pop out. And maybe it's sort of that athleticism not really popping on tape there as well. Maybe that's what I'm seeing here. What I had seen as far as where he's functional and it worked and he was able to, win at the collegiate level was releases off the line of scrimmage, to win position, to stack DBs, and win vertically. So I don't, he might be one of those who can, maybe not, they're not blazing speed, but maybe he can win vertically. Similar how I was talking about with Kayshon Boutee there, that you don't have to be the burner to be able to win position and win a route down the field. So that was something that showed up a few times on tape for me that I liked. But I do think whether it's the athleticism or maybe just a little bit more refinement, I think that's something that I'm looking for this year.
Yeah, I'm looking for, I think, some more explosive plays this year out of him too. I feel like when I watched his 2020 film, there was more explosive plays, and I thought that athleticism and speed was maybe not the level of a guy like Jordan Addison or Downs, but I thought it was more approximating them than I think it is now. Who I think he's athletic. I just think for a guy who's only 170 pounds, you need something that kind of stands out at that, right? We know you can play in the league at 170 pounds or 175 pounds, but you better have a calling card, whether it's your movement, make people miss, your vertical speed. And I think right now I'm stuck on finding what is his thing that I know is going to translate the next level. He's good in college, but 170 pounds in the NFL at 5'9", without that like calling card of a trait that I think definitely translates, is where I'm a little bit reserved about him entering the senior year. And I want to see him kind of get back to that guy who I thought was a little bit more explosive in 2020. And then maybe I'd have less reservations about him if I feel like he could be more of that vertical slot guy. And we'll see if we see a little bit more of that. I know Jerkovic missed some time last year. That could be part of why he had a little bit of a down year. I don't love Jerkovic, the prospect, but he's a good college prospect and a good college quarterback. And he only played really in about 4 or 5 games last year. So that could go hand in hand with Flowers, not maybe living up to what the expectations I expected for him last year. So it'll be interesting to follow closely, especially if Jerkovic is healthy all year there. Let's keep this going. Next up is Tyler Harrell out of Alabama, formerly of Louisville. He's a redshirt junior. He's 6'1", 192 pounds. He only caught 18 passes last year for Louisville, but for 523 yards and 6 touchdowns. 18 catches, 523 yards. So average size, needs to add to his frame a little bit, but we're talking about a guy with great athleticism. I think the best long speed and elite speed of any receiver in this draft class. Burst, acceleration, and explosion off the line of scrimmage to win vertically. Good body control and ball skills. Very good footwork and yak ability in the open field. I think we already talked about Burton being a star in Alabama. I think Tyler Harrell by week 4 is going to be a household name in college football. I'm not going to say and go out on a limb and say he's their next Jameson Williams transfer that just, reaches, epic heights. But I think Tyler Harrell is going to be a guy that you're going to see barely being talked about as a guy who catapults himself into top 100 type conversation because of his elite long speed and how well he's going to fit in there in Alabama, with Bryce Young pushing the ball vertically down the field, which we know he's capable of. Jeff, any questions, follow-ups, for another guy, limited production? You're on mute.
Yeah, limited production. So when I haven't gotten a chance to watch myself either. I guess my only question then for someone who's probably dug a little bit deeper on both these guys, what do you think and because there's a lot of unknown as they've transferred in, what do you think the odds are? Like what percent chance could Harrell potentially outproduce Jermaine Burton? Is there any chance?
I don't think he's going to outproduce him in terms of targets or anything like that. but I do think he's going to produce, a monster year in terms of yardage. I think big plays, I think you're going to see. So I think it's going to be one of those instances where I don't remember off the top of my head, so I don't want to come across, but like I feel like a couple years ago, Henry Ruggs probably didn't lead them in any statistical categories with the other receivers that Alabama had there, but he just made more big plays than the other guys that were there. I think Harrell is going to kind of be in that case. He might not catch 80 or 90 passes. He's not going to be Jordan Addison or Josh Downs, but I could easily see 55 to 65, and they're going to be of big variety in terms of big plays. So I think you're going to see there's going to be some weeks that he catches 3 passes and it's going to be like 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like I just think that's where this is headed, especially because defenses are going to have to respect the more well-rounded game of Burton, a guy who's going to be their alpha, probably their X guy. And then Harrell is going to be this guy with this blazing speed, and you're not really going to be able to double team him, because if you double team him, then Burton's going to eat you up on the other side. Ja'Cory Brooks, I mean, they're obviously loaded. Alabama always is. But Harrell, I think, is going to end up getting a lot of single coverage and maybe not a safety kind of, over the top. And I think when that happens with Bryce Young's accuracy, even though he doesn't have a monster arm, I think you're going to see a lot of times where he just puts the ball where it needs to be and Harrell's going to take it to the house, right? And what that's going to do in terms of when that happens is really open up things underneath for the other receivers, for the run game. And I think he's just going to be a huge weapon there. And it might not turn into a, really gaudy statistical number, but the impact that he's going to have there and the amount of big plays you're going to see, I think is very lofty. So it's going to be fun to watch him, because I think he's well off the radar from people, and I don't think that'll last very long. So let's keep this moving along. Next up is Elijah Higgins out of Stanford. He's a senior. He's 6'3", 240 pounds. There's already been some talk about maybe a tight end move at the next level as a move tight end. But let's right now focus on him as a wide receiver. He's got very good size, rare frame in term for a wide receiver at 240. But for a guy his size, he has got really interesting athleticism. I would classify it somewhere as good to very good. He's got speed. He's got movement skills. Senior Bowl director put up a clip on Twitter and had like the miles per hour of Higgins running. And it was like one of those things that's just like freaky for a man his size to be able to move that quickly. And it's obvious on some of the film as well. Very good play strength, got the length, catch radius, ability to high point and win contested catches. He uses his body well to create late separation. Shows good body control, ball skills, and hands. It'll be interesting. Depth to complementary wide receiver, move tight end as a pass catcher. I think there's a variety of ways this can play out for him transitioning at the next level. I think he's going to probably have a very good statistical year this year as maybe the lead guy of that Stanford offense. I struggle sometimes with bigger wide receivers, but he does have that. He does have surprisingly good athleticism. I just want to see more advancement in terms of his route tree, his releases off the line of scrimmage. If he is going to play wide receiver, a tight end, what can he show in terms of his blocking capabilities? Can he only block, way more undersized DBs on the outside? Because I think he's shown that he can do a little bit of that at Stanford as a wide receiver. And handling more physical press. A guy his size is going to have to win with his physicality and toughness. There's not a lot of evidence yet of him consistently beating press. Any follow-ups or questions for me on Higgins, Jeff?
No, and even being in my backyard, I should be a little bit more familiar with him. But it is it's an odd size and frame and what the NFL may or may not want to do with them. And they've been there's teams out there experimenting with these players and trying to find roles and fits there. And but one thing that we know for sure is if you have a size and you have that speed athleticism combo, teams will be willing to invest and a higher pick than expected to try to get you in the offense somehow. Similar to a Chase Claypool, who didn't have this breakout production at Notre Dame, but comes through with that size speed combo. So I wonder if we're, is there any, what would be the absolute ceiling on, Higgins draft stock?
Yeah, I mean, I'd find it hard pressed with just knowing this draft class already to see him crack the top 100 picks. So I think we're talking more of like a day 3 guy, a round 4, round 5. Now, if he was to go to the tight end position, I think it's a pretty good tight end class too. I just think there would be so many uncertainties with that I think he's a guy that, unless like his speed is like 4.4 at like 240 pounds, I think it'll be good for his size. I think if it's 4.52 and he's 240 pounds, well, that's a really good time. That's good athleticism. So I think it'll matter on that. It'll matter on what the NFL might think about doing in terms of positionally. And I also think this year, if he shows more advancement in terms of route running, his releases, they might be more inclined to keep him at wide receiver and think he can beat defensive backs at the next level. So let's keep this moving along. Next up, we talked about his teammate before, Rakim Jarrett out of Maryland, junior, 6 feet tall, 190 pounds. I think he's got capabilities to be a starting receiver at the next level. Average size and frame, very good to great athleticism, speed, burst, acceleration, explosiveness. He can get vertical as well. Shows really good yak ability, good separation quickness in and out of his breaks. I like his footwork, his route running. Good body control, ball skills, and hands. It shows the ability to adjust, high point, and extend even at 6 feet, 190 pounds. I do have some questions about contested catches, handling physicality, and things like that. I think he's got to show a little bit more improvement in his releases off the line of scrimmage. But I think the ceiling is higher for Jarrett. I'd be interested in that Maryland offense like we talked about before. Jeff, any thoughts on Jarrett or any follow-up questions?
Well, it'd be interesting to see, which games had a couple of those contested catch concerns. Because one thing that seemed to stand out when I watched his game against Michigan State was just how he attacked the ball away from his body. It just reminded me of NFL level receivers, guys like DJ Moore and Chris Godwin, or even Jahan Dotson coming out, right? Just the way that they were able to attack the ball and then pull it in. It's usually a higher level of of refinement for hands than you typically see at the college level, and really typical of pro wide receivers. So I don't know much about how the rest of his game could round out and form a prospect to where he'd be drafted. So that's, where I need to dig in a little bit more this year. And again, we mentioned Demus too. So who's going to really kind of, is one of them going to kind of take the throne as the go-to guy? That's something that, I think with them both being skilled wide receivers will tell a lot to who's been developing their skills.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because when I look at Demus, I think outside receiver. When I think Jarrett, I think he's a vertical slot, but also can be that motion outside Z receiver as well. How that offense plays out this year, like I'm going to be very invested in watching Maryland offense. Like that is not something I'm usually like, that's like, oh, let me make sure I set the DVR. Maryland's playing at 12 noon on a Saturday. This year I'm going to be really intrigued to watch that Maryland offense and see them side by side, like playing this year. Like, who do I see more from this year? More development, more growth between these two players. Because I kind of put, Demus on that round 3, round 4 border. And I think Jarrett's on that late 1-2 border in terms of his talent and his upside. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see, do they come a little closer together, or is there more separation this year, or do they flip-flop and Demus rises to be that round 1, round 2 guy, and Jarrett maybe falls back a little bit now with Demus fully healthy? I think there's a lot of things that could kind of happen there with these two guys. So it's going to be fun to kind of follow that closely. Let's keep this going. Next up, one of the other bigger names in the draft class. We've talked about a bunch of them already today. A couple more left. Quentin Johnston out of TCU. He's a junior. He's 6'4". He's 215 pounds. This is a guy who I think profiles as an outside X wide receiver. He reminds me a lot of T. Higgins in terms of his frame, ball skills, and body control. But I do think he has a little bit more straight vertical, explosive long speed. He's got great size and frame, great athleticism, speed, burst, stride length, catch radius, ball skills, and body control. He showed the ability to high point the ball and adjust to win contested catches. He's got good play strength, contact balance, and physicality. You see it at the catch point and after the catches, an ability to break tackles and pick up yak. Obviously, similar to his former running back, Evans, who now headed to Ole Miss. We just haven't seen Quentin Johnston get a large work share and a large target opportunity and put up that monster statistical year. So kind of like Jermaine Burton, there's a lot of projecting going on here, but he checks off so many boxes in terms of traits you want to see at the next level. Obviously, there's a significant amount of things I want to see growth and development from this year. And I think if we just see him get a much larger target opportunity, we'll see whether or not he can show more route tempo in his routes, show more refinement and more separation at the top of his routes, show a better understanding of route concepts, expanding his overall route tree. That's kind of what I'm looking for here this year. Jeff, any traits or things that stood out that I didn't mention, or any other things that you would like to see him, in terms of growth and development?
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting because I know he doesn't have that monster statistical season, but it'd be really curious, for the people, the metrics people, the analytics people of, what's his market share? Did he break out with market share, even with like a lower production, just because the rest of the, offensive players around him were doing not much either. So I'll that's something that I'll be, listening to when they start going in and doing their analysis through draft season. But for me, and when I look at a player, like they clearly used him as, their engine of the passing game. They especially when they needed a big play. And there was a lot of refinement that I saw. I don't know if I would say T. Higgins per se, because I think that, I don't think he'll get sort of lumped into the slow, tall, contested catch group, because I think he does have enough athleticism to create more separation, to be able to, win further down the field, be a little faster, be a little bit more of a yak weapon. I think his release off the line is pretty well developed. I think when he's facing off coverage, he's able to attack that cushion with really rapidly. He just eats up the yards between him and the DB very quickly, tracks the football really well. And then again, I do think the physicality, definitely an area of his game that I've noted as well. And I do think there's, I'm sure there's development to reach an NFL level of his route running, but I think he has shown to me some well-timed breaks where he's able to create separation. I think my area of development, and I noticed this come up with a couple drops, a couple missed big plays, is his hands positioning. So being a little tighter, his underhand positioning, just reducing some of those drops in critical moments. So a little bit of a technique there that, again, I think that's a pretty workable fix, but we'll see if that's something that he improves upon, in college first.
Yeah, and I do think Johnston is one of those guys that the ceiling is sky high,
Mhm.
right? Like, we've already talked about Boutee, we'll talk about Smith-Njigba soon. We talked about Addison and Downs. A guy like Quentin Johnston is not nearly as refined yet as those two guys. Obviously hasn't put the production up like those guys. But if there's a guy who can push Boutee and Smith-Njigba to be one of the top one or the second number one or number two wide receiver off the board, I think Johnston fits that profile. He's the guy that, really is intriguing in terms of being that traditional outside wide receiver that literally checks off every, prototype that you want for him. And, I started this off by saying, there are certain things about his game that do remind me of T. Higgins, but with the understanding that that's more at the catch point. That's more the ball skills, body control, his ability to finish at the catch point. His level of explosion and athleticism is more advanced. He's going to test out better than T. Higgins for sure. He can probably do more after the catch than T. Higgins for sure. But that it was that ball skills and body control that I just thought his ability to contort the body and, win at that spot and create that late separation, with that at the catch point athleticism, I thought was very reminiscent of T. Higgins, who that's the reason why I like T. Higgins. And I didn't think he kind of got stuck in that, big ball guy. I thought there was a lot of athleticism at the catch point for a guy like T. Higgins, even though his time speed wasn't great. Johnston is going to have the time speed, but I think also I like him at the catch point very similarly to T. Higgins. So I think Johnston's a guy who could really make a move right towards the top of the wide receiver ranks.
One final thought there too. There's two guys that really jumped out at me when I started going through, these names. One was Jermaine Burton and one was Quentin Johnston, as guys that, I think the development arc is going to be pretty high, and I think have a decent chance of passing someone like Addison and certainly passing someone like Downs as well. So those are guys that I would not be shocked if not only were they in that conversation with Smith-Njigba and Kayshon Boutee, but if we're sitting here in 6 months and talking about them as potentially the number one wide receiver in this class.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I love what you just brought up, because I want to mention here, because we've had some conversations with people, on Twitter this week who asked, like, these rankings that I put out on Twitter, are they draft rankings? Are they Devy fantasy rankings? And a lot of it does blend, right? And I think the names that you just mentioned, right? Burton, Quentin Johnston. If somebody asked me, and I have my Devy rankings, but if somebody tweeted me and said, Devy rankings, do you like Quentin Johnston and Jermaine Burton more, or do you like Jordan Addison and Josh Downs more? The answer is definitively, I want Quentin Johnston and Burton on my Devy team before I want Addison and Josh Downs. But if you ask me to rank them just based on the film analysis and even what the NFL might think of them right now based on what they are, I have Downs and Addison ahead of those two guys, because they are playmakers with big time vertical speed. And what we've seen in Burton and Quentin Johnston is still a little bit limited, right? There's a lot we still need to see, but I do think if they hit their upside, which is what Devy's really all about in terms of fantasy leagues, their ceiling is higher than Downs and Addison. So it's kind of one of those things that, we're mostly talking traits, film analysis, what we think the NFL would think of these guys right now if they were going to have a draft tomorrow, is what we're kind of scouting here. But Devy's more of like projecting like who has the highest ceiling for fantasy. Quentin Johnston and Burton are right at the top of the list after the two guys of Boutee and Smith-Njigba. So just wanted to kind of talk that out, because I know we've been talking about that a little bit on Twitter this week as well. Let's keep this going. Next up, with another name that's long been talked about in the Devy circles, and that is Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma. He's a junior. He's 5'11", 180 pounds. A little bit of a down year last year for, I think, what people expected from him. He's undersized, similar to the guys we've talked about tonight, Gary Bryant and Addison, Downs. But he's got very good athleticism, speed, acceleration, burst, and explosiveness. Mims can win vertically. We've seen it over his years at Oklahoma. He can be a dangerous weapon in terms of his yak ability as well. I like his body control and his ball skills with the ability to adjust. I see good footwork, hands, and separation quickness in and out of his breaks. I would say his route running is probably average right now. I think he's a complementary to starting wide receiver in 3 wide sets. I think he's more of a vertical slot who can play some outside Z and be that motion guy, but I like him best inside. Jeff, any thoughts on Mims? I feel like we've talked about a lot of guys who kind of fit the same prototype, from Addison, Downs to Gary Bryant to now Marvin Mims. They all basically are like the same measurements, right? 5'9" to 5'10" is where I'm sure all these guys are going to land, even though Mims is listed at 5'11". I'm sure he's probably 5'10". And they're all in that 175 to 180 pounds. And they all profile pretty similarly to what I think the NFL is going to view these guys, but they all obviously have different nuances to their games. What did you see with Mims?
I think the hardest thing for me there is, when you have a guy who's, 5'9", 5'10", 180, you usually see a lot more agility, suddenness. And, I don't think that was really jumping out on Mims tape to me. And so whether that's limited ability there, or whether it's just, not as refined in his route deception like you had on your notes. Um, I think we'll learn that through testing and whether he has that ability. But that's one thing from the size perspective where, it really just jumps off the page for a guy like Josh Downs, where it doesn't for a guy like Marvin Mims. But, for a guy of his size and frame, I thought he had amazing body control, tracking ability, ability to adjust to downfield catches, great at the catch point. And so, so I think, that's not something that I think the way that he wins, or in the way that he is winning right now on the college level, is a little bit different than what I would have expected, from his measurements profile. And I think those players are actually some of the most interesting to watch, how their transition to the NFL pans out, right? Because sometimes the NFL gets stuck in profiles, and kind of slots, sees them and their measurements and says, you're a square peg, and they try to, put them in a square hole, but they're different than that. They have a different dimension, a different way that they win. So that's just one thing that, I'll be following through, and it'll be a really interesting profile for draft day.
Yeah, and listen, I think the one thing that sometimes, people struggle with is winning at the catch point or winning vertically down the field comes in two different ways, right? There could be guys that are really athletic that show that ability with really good body control, with the ability to adjust. And that's different than a guy winning with like play strength, physicality, and toughness when he just like out muscles somebody, right? So like I think Mims would struggle in in the latter part there, right? He's not going to be a guy that has much physicality, play strength, and toughness to win a contested catch in that situation. But if he has the opportunity, I think as he's like moving, and then show that ability to adjust in air or contort his body. That's like how he's going to win vertically down the field. And you're right. We don't usually see guys with his size frame doing some of those things, which is interesting and makes him a little bit different than some of the other guys we talked about, earlier, who have that same, body structure type frame, whatever you want to call it. And we'll see with Oklahoma this year, right? Last year was a weird year for Oklahoma. We thought Spencer Rattler was going to have this monster year, and that was going to translate to Mims. Then he battled inconsistency. Then Caleb Williams took over. Mims didn't really have that monster year that we all expected. We'll see if that can kind of come this year. Let's keep this going. Next up is A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest. 6'4", 203 pounds. Great size, average frame, good athleticism, speed, burst, and acceleration to win vertically. Very good ball skills and body control with the ability to adjust and high point the football. I see good footwork and hands with above average releases, route running, and separation quickness. This is a guy that was not on my radar, but when I watched him, I came away thinking he is a complimentary wide receiver with the upside to maybe even develop into a starter down the line. I think he can be a traditional outside X receiver. I would definitely put him in that like early day 3 mix, but a guy who would be intriguing to NFL teams. I want to see this year some growth and development from him in terms of handling press and showing a little bit more in terms of elusiveness and agility in the open field. I think he's okay in terms of his yak ability, but it's more like using like his play strength or like straight line speed than it is like making people miss in the open field. You're not going to see that too much, or we haven't seen that too much from the film that it is on there. Any follow-ups or questions about Perry? I know he's a guy that's not been on many people's radars because he was brought to my attention very late in the summer. And then I watched him and did come away pretty impressed.
Yeah, just give me one more minute to squeeze his name in between and put a little star on it to come back to him. So
Yeah, and listen, and he, I will say, like, we sometimes, struggle to get just, the game film that we want on all of these guys, and then, sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's very little, sometimes, we have to overly rely on, clips and highlights and stuff like that. I will say though, anytime it's an ACC player, the ACC YouTube channel does a really good job of putting together like a solid like 10 to 12-minute video on the player that at least gets you to see their areas of where they win. It doesn't really help you in terms of like seeing some of their things that are things that you want to see a lot of growth and development on. But that is one thing I've noticed, that ACC players, their ACC YouTube channel does a really good job of piecing together almost every single one of their catches jammed into like a video, that it really at least gives the ability to see the different ways they win, and see their best plays at least during the season, to kind of get a feel for what type of player they are. So anytime I see an ACC college, I get kind of excited knowing there's at least going to be that at our, at our, ability to watch that, and then hopefully find some, full film on them as well, to kind of see a full game or two, to get our best read on them. But always looking for those ACC guys. Keep this going. Next up out of Michigan State is Jayden Reed. He's a senior. He's 5'11", 187 pounds. Last year, he went over 1,000 yards on only 59 catches. Really impressive year. Double-digit touchdowns as well. A little undersized there at 187. We'll see if that 5'11 is a little generous or not, or it's a real 5'11. But the athleticism is good to very good. He shows good speed, burst, and acceleration. He's got very good footwork, very good short area quickness, yak ability. He shows agility and elusiveness in the open field to make people miss. Good route runner, shows ball skills and body control. I think he's a complementary receiver with the upside to be top 3 on a depth chart due to his big play ability and his kick and punt returning skills. I mean, we just saw Velus Jones go in the 3rd round, and Jayden Reed is a guy who's a much more refined receiver than a guy like Velus Jones is, but he's got that dynamic return ability as well. So I think the NFL is going to be really intrigued with a guy like Jayden Reed. Obviously, the frame, the size, play strength, toughness, physicality, beating press, those are all, valid concerns. But we've talked enough, like he's not 175, 180. He's at least got a little bit more to his frame. And he's already shown the ability to be an explosive playmaker in terms of his return skills and winning vertically down the field. So I think he's going to be a guy that generates a lot of buzz this year. Last year, I'm not saying he's going to have Kenneth Walker type buzz, but we saw Kenneth Walker last year, Michigan State, really generate a lot of buzz. I think Jayden Reed's going to have some level of buzz to his name that's not being talked a lot about right now. But that definitely is a guy that I think people are going to be more familiar with by the time next year's draft season rolls around. Jeff, any questions, follow-ups on Reed? I know we're talking about some guys that have not been guys that have been on the Devy radar much over the last couple of years, but I think they're going to be names that people are really going to want to get familiar with this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think as soon as we really get into the week-to-week shows, we're going to be able to profile these guys as they, as they emerge. No questions on Reed here, but we can go off to our next player, Rashee Rice. So he's out of SMU. He's a senior. He's 6'1", 203. Why don't you go through his profile, Paul?
Yeah, so he had a productive year last year for SMU. I think he's a complementary receiver. Maybe he can eventually become a vertical slot and play in 3 wide sets or 4 wide sets. He can probably be that outside Z motion receiver as well, but I like him best in the slot. He's got average size and frame, but really good to very good athleticism, speed, bursts. He shows explosiveness. I think he's a really good route runner for a guy playing at SMU. Again, the level of competition is something that we don't have control over, but I see route running capabilities to his game. I like his footwork. He shows good separation quickness. He's got yak ability and elusiveness in the open field. I see ball skills. I see body control, the ability to adjust. I want to see a little bit more diverse of a route tree. I think that's important for a guy coming from SMU. I want to see that. I think the scheme at SMU does create a lot of wide open passing lanes and a lot of production at times. He can't do anything about that. But I do think it's something to make note of. And I didn't get a lot of or much of any in terms of him handling, more physical press style coverage. So that's something I'll be looking for this year. But there are things to his game that I like. And I do think he does have a little bit more, obviously, size to his game at 203 to be a guy that doesn't just profile as a slot receiver. He could maybe handle the rigors of outside a little bit and not be concerned, about it. So I think that's something that, I think he could be a guy somewhere maybe in the early day remix, where, last year we thought guys like Danny Gray might fall to round 4 and he ended up going to round 3. I think a guy like Rice I don't think he's got the straight line, burst as a guy like Danny Gray, but I do think, similarly to Gray, he could be a guy that warrants our draft attention a lot more, by the time April of next year rolls around than we're currently giving him right now. So let's keep this moving to one of my favorite prospects and a guy that I've been talking about a lot. I thought he was going to come out last year, and that is Ainias Smith out of Texas A&M. He's a senior. He's 5'10". He's 194 pounds. To me, right off the bat, his movement skills remind me of Kadarius Toney with the ball in his hands after the catch or in space. He might not have as much juke ability as Kadarius Toney, but I think it's pretty, special in his own right. He's an electric kick and punt returner. He's undersized a little bit, but he's got very good athleticism, speed, burst, and acceleration. I already said I think he's going to be the best mover in terms of his movement skills. He shows really good suddenness, change of direction skills, agility, elusiveness, and yak ability. Very good separation quickness with above average route running. He's got versatility to impact the game as a receiver, rusher, and a returner. And I think for a guy who 5'10", 194, the other comparison to Kadarius Toney is I thought Kadarius Toney had pretty functional play strength and contact balance that aided to his quickness and movement skills and make you miss ability. I think Ainias Smith has that same type of capabilities as Kadarius Toney. Is that it's not his calling card, but if you combine the play strength and contact balance with the athleticism and movement capabilities, it really has me intrigued because I think he's going to be very hard to take down. Obviously, you want to see some areas to improve his route running, refinement, expand his overall route tree, things that I want to see him work. But I think him, and we know how much I like Devon A-Chain, Texas A&M, I think he's going to have an explosive offense this year. And I think we're going to see statistical years out of Smith and A-Chain that really make both those guys really intriguing by the time next April rolls around. Jeff, any thoughts on Smith, what you liked about him, areas where you want to see him maybe, work on and improve this year, to be a guy that maybe warrants going, in the top 100 next year, be a day 2 type guy? Is there something you specifically want to see from him?
So I got the pleasure of watching him be an integral element of beating Alabama. And yeah, what jumped out was that suddenness, the separation quickness, suddenness in his breaks. And I did also note, I think he plays pretty physically. So even with his size and frame, I think that physicality will aid him in his game. And just from, not just, we're talking about Kadarius Toney and we're talking about these, dynamic weapons, right? But NFL teams are going to still want to come see them be receivers. And, I think that was something that actually stood out as far as, he has an understanding of attacking the leverage of a DB so that, when he does make his break, he's wide open, he's serving his quarterback well. So that route running is not just physical tools, but also I think intellectual tools of understanding, how to, put a defender in a bind, and even just situational awareness of working back to his quarterback and, helping out on, broken plays and scrambles. So, I think there's elements there that, profile as even just less of sort of those weapons like, Toney or, Wandale, and, we'll see what they become as far as, receivers and, for the Giants. But I think that there's elements there in Smith's game that I would push back on anybody who kind of considers him sort of just a specialist.
Yeah. And the thing about it is we've already seen that guys who are deemed specialists, I hate using the word gadgets. I heard Greg Cosell coin something called package players, right? And I like that better than gadget, because gadget's got like this negative connotation, kind of like game manager. And I don't even think Smith falls in that as a package player, right? Velus Jones was drafted as a package player. Wendell Robinson might be deemed a package player, but I think they have large plans in that package for a guy like Wendell. But so we already see guys who are even deemed package players in that roles be worthy of day 2 draft capital. I think Smith's already even more advanced in some of those package style players. So I think, I'm surprised when I kind of gathered what was out there that he is where he is in people's ranks. I'm going to be surprised if he doesn't move up the boards, if he has as good a year as I think he could this year. Because I think he's a guy that everything I've seen about him kind of screams out, this is kind of the guy that NFL teams are gravitating towards, the versatility that he offers, the big playability, the suddenness. Like, teams seem to want these guys. So I'm going to be interested to kind of see his kind of draft stock as the year goes on, and then obviously the pre-draft process. But Smith is a guy I feel like we're going to be talking a lot about during the in-season shows for sure. Let's take this to the next guy. Arguably the consensus 1A or 1B in the receiver group, and that is Jaxon Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State. He's a junior. He's 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, the gaudy statistics of 95 catches for 1,600 yards and 9 touchdowns. Average size and frame. I think the long speed is only average, but I think he's got very good to great overall athleticism, movement skills, short area bursts and separation quickness, great footwork, change of direction skills, yak ability, elusiveness and agility in the open field. I think he's a great route runner, varies his route tempo well, releases and understanding of route concepts are there. I think he shows great body control, hands, and ball skills with the ability to adjust. I think the only questions I have about is he only lined up in the slot? So I want to see him be a little bit more versatile lining up outside. I don't think he has that game-breaking vertical speed that he's going to be a guy that, you see having a lot of 50 or 60-yard explosive plays in that regards. And we just haven't seen a lot versus press. When I was trying to come up with a guy who I thought he reminded me of, to me, he's the college version of Cooper Kupp when I watched him play. Because I don't think Cooper Kupp has got this elite speed. He doesn't, but he's a great athlete. He's a great mover. He's got great quickness. He's a great route runner. To me, Smith-Njigba is right now, I think, the college version of what Cooper Kupp became an elite NFL receiver without game-breaking speed. That's kind of where I am with Smith-Njigba. Jeff, what do you see from him? Is there anything that kind of raised the red flag a little bit that you're like, okay, I kind of want to see this? I mean, listen, part of it is we just might not have answers. Ohio State is just never their scheme just is so amazing at creating things that there are things that we're just never really going to see. I didn't mention contested catches because I'm not really sure how he is in contested catches. That's just part of it. So like, I don't put things in here if I just never had the ability to see it. I don't know if it's a concern. I don't know if it's a strength. I don't know where it is, but that's partly that Ohio State scheme. I'm not sure we're going to get answers in that regards.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think you're right. I don't know. The one thing I see from Cooper Kupp that, would be that I don't see from Smith-Njigba right now is just the absolute ankle breaking man one-on-one, beating, route running. Not to say he's a bad route runner. I actually have, a skilled manipulator with suddenness, speed, and hands, so what you saw is you just saw him absolutely demolish zone coverage. You talk about the OSU scheme, like, they had players like Olave who could, and Wilson who could just, win one-on-one against man coverage. So, Njigma's there, out of the slot, he's very good awareness to find the space, in the zone and position himself for yards after the catch. He just eats up open field, space. And so that's why you saw such gaudy stats is, he's got an understanding of the spatial elements of the defense and of the field. There are some questions. Like, some people have said he's the best wide receiver, or was the best wide receiver on, Ohio State's roster last year. And I think he was the third best wide receiver on Ohio State's roster last year. That doesn't mean he can't, rise to the occasion, and be drafted higher than them, and maybe be a better NFL wide receiver, especially, with the way the NFL is able to use, receivers with his skill set and talents. But like you said, we've seen him in the slot. What is he going to do with his game this year? How is it going to evolve and develop? Like, that's a big storyline and question. If it does, develop to be, an all three positions wide receiver, I mean, then I think he's pretty clearly the top player in the class. If it doesn't, I mean, there's still guys like Kayshon Boutee, and I still think guys like Burton and guys like Quentin Johnston have the ability to potentially be drafted earlier because of what they bring, on the outside. So it's just kind of a question for how he's going to be used this year. And, fortunately, with as sort of boring as Ohio State is, because they're always so good, that's a great storyline for us to be able to watch through the season.
Yeah, and and I do think he's going to get an opportunity this year, right? I mean, without Olave, and without Garrett Wilson there, I know they're loaded at wide receiver, as they always are, but he's going to, I think, get an opportunity to play a variety of positions this year. And I think it'll allow us to see him a little bit more versus press. It'll allow us to see him a little bit versus man coverage, more versus man coverage than we've seen. And I think it'll answer some of those. But I do think this is probably trending similar to this year, how the wide receivers kind of all grouped together, right? Starting with Drake London, right through, Jahan Dotson there. And we saw, rapid fire, wide receivers coming off the board.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it might be all that different this year, like next year. I think we could see, Smith-Njigba and Boutee and Quentin Johnston and Jermaine Burton, and maybe throwing one of those other guys like Addison or Downs that could be next year's like Jahan Dotson or whatever. I think we could see 5 of those guys or 6 guys go in like a short span in round 1 again, because we know teams are looking for playmakers. We know teams are craving them. I think it'll be interesting to see if Smith-Njigba or Boutee can kind of separate themselves to be in that top 5 mix or top 10 mix, like we saw Jalen Waddle and Jamar Chase and even Devonta Smith, like go in that range where they separated themselves the previous year. Can any of these wide receivers this year do that? I don't think it's as clear cut as maybe people think, that Smith-Njigba is so far ahead of a guy like Jermaine Burton or Quentin Johnston. I think that's where they might be a little bit closer already. And then we'll see how this kind of year plays itself out. And it could just be this team is looking for this and this team is looking for that.
Yeah.
And, that's how things like Henry Ruggs go ahead of, Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb. And, we see teams looking for certain profiles and certain types that really can, drive the narrative a little bit as well, not just the best pure football player. So
I mean, that's what happens when you roll like 3 touchdowns on the national championship, playoff stage. You're going, that's what's going to be in people's minds. I think everybody's really excited about this 2023 class, and maybe, I think I'd expect for them to come off more like the 2020 the 2020 year, where or 2021 year, where we saw a few more come through on like the 20s to 30s range, like as like a big group of players, at least right now, versus a cluster of 5 in the top 15.
Yeah, that's very possible, especially with a stronger class. Listen, if we're going to have 4 or 5 quarterbacks go in the top 10, and I'm not saying we definitely will, but if that ever was to happen, that doesn't leave the window for 4 or 5 wide receivers in like top 16 either, which then means they're going to get pushed into that little latter part of round 1, like you talked about, so it's also a very good pass rusher draft next year. So there's a lot of things that could drive the narrative in terms of where these wide receivers come off the board. 3 guys left. Let's go. I'm going to try to go through a little bit quicker to round this out. Next up is Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee. He's a redshirt senior. He's 6'3", 214 pounds. Put together a really good season last year, especially the second half. 64 catches, almost 1,100 yards, and 12 touchdowns. I think he's got the capability to be an outside X receiver and eventually develop into a starting wide receiver in 3 wide sets, so complementary to starting receiver. I think he's got very good size and frame, good athleticism with average to above average speed and acceleration. I love the body control, ball skills, length, his usage of hand in his routes, and the hands at the catch point. He shows the ability to adjust, extend, high point to win at contested catches. Very good to great play strength and physicality to create that late separation that I've talked about a couple times today. And and uses that to win. The game he put up against, I think it was Alabama last year, really impressive. Tillman is a guy like Dontay Demus, who we talked about earlier, who I'm really intrigued with. I think these guys are guys that maybe are in that like round 3, round 4 mix, but could see them really cement themselves as day 2 type prospects this year. I think Tillman and Demus are 2 of those guys. I like both their games a lot. Tillman really put forward some really good tape last year, especially versus the opponents he was going up against. And obviously Tennessee, not a juggernaut in terms of their team. And he still was the focal point of their pass offense and put up a really strong year last year. Excited to see what Tillman does as a follow-up this year. Jeff, any thoughts on Tillman or any questions for me about Tillman?
No, I think these are players that we're going to go through during the year and be able to hit in better depth. So why don't we, since we're running quite long, go ahead and rapid fire through the next couple players, and then we could break down where they land in our expectations for ranks.
Yeah. So next up is Parker Washington. Now, he is pretty high in some rankings that are out there. He's out of Penn State. He's a junior. He's 5'10", 210 pounds. A little undersized, but a very good frame, right? That 5'10", 210. That's not a profile you see too often. He's got really good play strength, physicality, and toughness, average athleticism and speed, but he's good to very good route runner, understanding of route concepts, footwork, yak ability, agility, ball skills, and body control with the ability to adjust. Complementary to starting wide receiver in 3 wide sets. To me, he's a slot wide receiver who has the frame to play some outside Z position as well. Not mostly is lined up in the slot, has not shown much outside yet. I don't think he's got the ability to win vertically down the field. The guy he kind of reminded me of, and this is a compliment to him, not a knock, is there's a lot of Jarvis Landry to his game, from his size frame, from his stylistically how he plays, the level of concerns or developmental areas. I don't know if he's going to change that too much. He's just a really good football player who I think is just more of a gamer and a footballer, a good football player than a guy who's going to test out great. We started out with Jarvis Landry way back when. I could see that with Parker Washington. I don't think he's going to – there's certain things he probably will do to change the direction stuff pretty good, but he's not going to be a guy that runs fast. That's just not his game, and some people are going to knock him for it, but I do think he could be a really good slot receiver at the next level. I don't have him as high as like some people. I don't have him on that Downs or Addison or even close to them, because those guys, while they're slot receivers, have that vertical ability and that big play ability. To me, Washington is not that, but he's a guy who could just be a really reliable guy and win with that play strength, toughness, and physicality. And I think this year, we'll see him have a really productive year for Penn State. Kind of intrigued by Washington. Some people have him a lot higher, so maybe there's something I'm missing about him. So he's a guy I'm definitely going to be excited during the season to hear your takes and hopefully Matt's takes on Washington, some of our guest takes. To see if somebody sees him a little bit differently than maybe I saw, because I thought the athleticism and speed were just average at best and not a lot in terms of his ability to win vertically. But maybe there's some things I missed about his game. So interested to see where this plays out. Jeff, anything with Washington, a follow-up or anything to, because he is a guy that's been pretty high. He's a guy that's pretty well known in the Devy world as well.
Well, we haven't really, said this much for any of these wide receivers. But we said it a lot for the running backs as, this is now their opportunity to seize, right? It's pretty hard to outshine what Jahan Dotson did last year. And so, in this case, he's got the ability to step up and be, the engine of the passing game there for them. So that's probably the first step for him to take, and and then he can build on up his draft resume from there.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see. So let's close this out. Last player tonight we're going to talk about, and that's 20, is Dontayvion Wicks out of Virginia. He's a redshirt junior. He's 6'2", 202 pounds. Last year, 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns on 57 catches. I think he's a complimentary receiver. Maybe got the upside to be top 3, top 4 in a depth chart. He actually reminds me a little bit of Romeo Doubs, who right now obviously is the talk of Packers camp and of the fantasy world. He's got good size, average frame. The athleticism is average in the long speed, but he's got very good ball skills, body control. He's got good length. He's got the catch radius with the ability to high point and adjust to win contested catches. I think he's got good play strength. He's a good route runner, and he creates that late separation to win vertically down the field. A lot of his game, a lot of this write-up was very similar to what I thought about Dobbs last summer when I watched him. And then I think people were really down on Dobbs during the year, I thought, because the lack of speed and stuff like that. And then we saw his draft stock not nearly be as hurt as I think people thought it was, by getting that round 4 draft capital. I think Wicks is a guy that stylistically and in terms of his strengths and concerning areas, he plays very similar to what Romeo Doubs did for Nevada at his time in college. And I'm interested to kind of see what the NFL thinks of Wicks. I think he could be a guy that could play either position on the outside, be an early day 3 pick. And I don't think he's getting talked a lot about, in the draft Twitter or the Devy community. And he could be an interesting name that we got to have on our radar. So there it is. Jeff, any thoughts on Wicks or any final follow-up question before I share my ranks?
Why don't we go right into the ranks?
Yeah. So, guys, we talked about 20 guys today. They do make up my top 20. There's another 8 guys in the notebook. So 28 in detailed profiles that, there's 8 additional guys that we didn't even talk about, and some really interesting names, especially guys who were once upon a time really thought of as guys in the Devy community that I'm really excited to look at this year. Jadon Hasselwood is transferring to Arkansas. Brew McCoy is transferred from USC to Tennessee. Joseph Nagata, can he rebound this year in Clemson? Jacob Cowing is transferring from UTEP to Arizona. Don't forget that name. Really intriguing player, Jacob Cowing. And then Dio Weiss in Oklahoma, another guy there with Marvin Mims. Can he bounce back after a subpar year last year from expectations? So those guys didn't even make my top 20. That's why I didn't get into them tonight as well. Those guys kind of got to rebound their draft stock a little bit. But where my ranks are right now, I have Jaxon Smith-Njigba up at number 1. I have Kayshon Boutee at number 2. I have Josh Downs at 3. Jordan Addison 4th. Quentin Johnston 5th. Jermaine Burton 6th. Rakim Jarrett 7th. Ainias Smith 8th. Marvin Mims 9th. Gary Bryant 10th. Tyler Harrell 11th. Parker Washington 12th. Cedric Tillman 13th. Dontay Demus Jr. at 14. A.T. Perry at 15, followed by Jayden Reed at 16, Rashee Rice at 17, Zay Flowers at 18, Elijah Higgins at 19, and Dontayvion Wicks at 20. Guys who I can think make the biggest jumps up this year, I already mentioned it earlier. Quentin Johnston, Jermaine Burton could catapult themselves right above Downs and Addison and be in that top 4 mix with Smith-Njigba and Boutee. Ainias Smith is a guy who I think can move up a little bit. I don't know if there's much room to maybe get into that top tier, but I think he can move up a little bit. And Tyler Harrell is a guy who I almost expect to move up a little bit as this year goes on. And guys like Gary Bryant maybe going the other way a little bit based on his usage at USC this upcoming year. Jeff, any thoughts on either my ranks or any top of your ranks maybe that you want to share? I know you just kind of started digging in.
Well, no, it looks pretty close, and mostly from a tier-based perspective. I think you've kind of got the top 2, and just behind them the next 4 guys, and some really interesting names right after that, right? The Maryland guys, Ainias Smith, Marvin Mims. I think that'd be the one thing that I'd highlight as another potential player to just keep an eye on, because I mentioned he could be potentially the better Maryland wide receiver, is Demus Jr. Sitting there at number 14. I think he could be a riser as well, just based on some of the basics that he put down on his tape for me. if he's able to develop that more as the go-to guy there.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun class. I mean, right now, my thoughts are that this offensive skill position group as a whole, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, is as exciting a group collectively in the summer as I remember scouting. There's just so many guys that I think warrant top 100 consideration, round 1, round 2 consideration, that, guys who I would have thought would have been locks in my top 20, like Joseph Nagata still, makes it falls to number 21 on my ranks, right? So many guys, even guys that people were asking me about certain players at the running back position or the quarterback position that we didn't even talk about on the pods. And that's because there's a lot of guys on the watch list for these guys that, that we haven't even gotten around to yet that I think, could really emerge this year. So it's going to be fun to talk about these guys throughout the year, do some deep dives, revisit a lot of these names we talked about constantly from a week to week perspective. And then obviously at the end of the year, summing it all up. It's going to be fun. Looking forward to the ride here with college football now fully, off and running as we are approaching the real opening, which I always will consider that Labor Day weekend. But obviously we have some games to get excited about, in that initial kickoff week or week 0, whatever you want to call it, as well. So on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.